Hello, everyone. Probably looks like I won't have a standard with Battle for Zendikar video for you until after the Pro Tour, which is kind of lame. But in the meantime, we're trying out sweet modern decks. We go on Dredge today. This is the card for card list that won the Modern Festival a while back, and that was a pretty big Magic Online tournament that had a bunch of qualifying tournaments leading up to the big finale, and the winner won one copy of every set that's legal in Modern, somewhere in the neighborhood of like $8,000 or whatever. I'm actually kind of surprised that this deck has not gotten any press despite winning that tournament. I think it was 10 rounds, and it was a pretty big tournament, pretty big deal to actually win that thing. We're gonna try this deck, and I know it's been kind of a long time coming for me to finally get around to trying this deck, but I'm excited. Me and Golgari Grave Troll go way back. What you have here are the enablers. We have Faithless Looting to put the Grave Troll in the yard, and Satyr Wayfinder to mill over some stuff. And ideally, what you want to do is set up a turn where you bring back multiple Vengevines. And in order to do that, we have some zombies here. We have the Zombie Fish, we have the Zombie Troll, and we have the Zombie, I guess. And either, you start with a Gravecrawler, or you play one of these fat things. As you mill over your deck, you will find more Gravecrawlers and more Vengevines, and then, you'll get to play a couple zombies. When you play Gravecrawler out of your graveyard, it does count as casting, so it will trigger Vengevine if it is the second creature you play for the turn, so that is very sweet. Nice little synergy. And, this deck kind of has, everything it needs, really. Dredge 6 is certainly a bigger number than Dredge 5, so that's pretty nice. And also, hard casting Golgari Grave Troll is one of the ways that you beat grindier matchups like Jund or some sort of control deck. Sometimes you have these games where, turn 2, you're bringing back, 3 Vengevines or something. That doesn't happen all that often, but it can. And then there are the other games where you're just kind of like this sort of mopey beatdown deck that's kind of putting some stuff in the graveyard. Maybe you're playing an Angler for 2 or 3 mana or whatever, and you just nickel and dime them out. But then there are the other games where it's just you have so much going on between Faithless Looting flashbacks and all these creatures coming out of your graveyards and stuff. And it is overall very resilient. I've played against this deck with Jund, and it just seems like a nightmare matchup to give you some sort of expectation as to how this deck is going to perform. It does its thing, and it does it quite well. And so aside from the enablers and the zombies and elementals that you give them the beatdowns with, we have 7 removal spells. Lightning Axe is another discard outlet. Murderous Cut is obviously pretty nice when you're just dredging a bunch of cards. It is basically just like the Black Swords to Plowshares. And then we have Abrupt Decay, just to answer any problematic permanents, things like Ghostly Prison, but also just very, very good against Splinter Twin and Tarmogoyf and things like that. And then we have a couple bullets, and by a couple I mean 4, I guess. So you have a Life from the Loam, which is another dredge card, but it also enables the mid to late game where you actually start getting up to 5 mana to cast the Golgari Grave Troll, so the Loam is very important for doing that. We have a Gnaw to the Bone to make sure we win races. Also just a very, very powerful card against burn decks. We have a Rotting Rats, which some of these decks in the past have played Mutavault to Life from the Loam back in order to make sure that you have a zombie to cast Gravecrawler. In this instance, we have a Rotting Rats that we can unearth, which is also pretty nice since it's a discard outlet. In case you have an extra Vengevine in your hand that you want to get rid of or something. But you can unearth this and then cast 2 Gravecrawlers out of your graveyard. And it's basically very, very awesome. As long as you are just doing your thing and dredging a bunch, eventually you will bring back all the Vengevines. So it's very important to note that. And then we got Miser's Dark Blast, which is just basically a removal spell, a way to pick off smaller creatures, and another dredge card. So this is obviously pretty good against things like Affinity, Young Pyromancer, Delver's Secrets, etc., etc. So that's the main deck. Nothing too spicy. The mana base is pretty normal. We have 2 Blood Crypts, 3 Overgrown Tombs, 3 basics for fighting Blood Moon, and then we have a couple Ghost Quarters to go with our Life from the Loam also. So we have a slight chance of beating Tron, but not a huge one. And then for the sideboard, we are dredging a bunch, so things like Ancient Grudge are pretty nice here. These are pretty good at picking off graveyard hate, like Relic of Progenitus, Nihil Spellmaw too, and it might not seem great because you kill the thing and then they still get to activate it, but it basically means that you get to do it on your own terms. So like if you just mini dredged a little bit and it might not be enough to blow their relic already, you can grudge it, force them to blow it, and then just continue doing what you were doing. Whereas before, you might have to wait until like you have 3 Vengevine triggers on the stack or whatever before they'll actually want to blow their relics. So having grudge is a pretty nice way to just get rid of that pretty cleanly. Also very good against affinity. Another Gnaw to the Bone for mostly burn decks. A couple spell guides for Splinter Twin. I feel like this deck is like a turn 6 deck on average, and that is certainly slower than Splinter Twin, so you do need some nice ways to interact with them. So we have a couple spell guides. There are a couple Golgari charms. I think this is mostly for Leyline of the Void, although there are certainly matchups where giving things -1/-1 is pretty relevant. I could anticipate boarding this in against Affinity potentially, but I do think that the Pulse and the Charms are mostly just like things that kill Leyline, but also have general utility. And then we have another removal spell in Damnation, which is good against various green-white creature decks. 4 Thoughtseizes, which is basically our go-to card against combo decks. Just kind of disrupt them a little bit and try to slow them down enough that so your turn 5, turn 6 clock is actually good enough to beat them, because most combo decks in Modern kill on turn 4. So our main deck is not very good against combo. And then the winter sideboard had one of each Leyline, which is kind of hilarious. But I get it. This is starting to see more and more play. Like, people are practicing this a little bit more often, where it's like, well, I don't want to board in like 4 or 3 white Leylines against burn, because that's a lot of my sideboard cards, but maybe it is worth the 1 slot in the 10% chance or whatever that it's in your opening hand when you only have 1 copy. And kind of the same deal with Leyline of the Void, where it's like, hey, maybe we want to hate on graveyards a little bit, but we don't want to try that hard. But, if we have it, cool. And then it doesn't take up that much of the sideboard space. So that is basically it. This is my first time playing this deck as well. Last week was the first time playing the Protean Hulk Footsteps deck. So I'm slowly going through these decks that I either featured in Daily Digest or have just been on the bucket list for quite some time. So this should be a fun one, and I'm ready. I hope you're ready.